outside yelling in heavy accents, "We're the Barmy Army." We were like, what the hell? They were the Exploited's roadies. They had been locked out and kept yelling, "Barmy Army." We couldn't understand them through the accents and had no idea what it meant.
So Randy now called my house and asked, "Hey, I got a question. Would you guys like to play with the Exploited?" Now, my bass player, Evo, was banned from City Gardens for life. Ivo. I don't know my own band members. For life, for fighting. He was the lead guy in the family. They kicked a lot of ass.
They did. Caused a lot of trouble. Alright, and I'm reading Steve Brown. Ivo was tough as nails, man. He was fucking tough. He was in the parking lot one night when this real big muscle-bound dude came out of the club like he's gonna whoop everybody's ass. We're drinking beer and hanging out, and he walks up and grabs a beer from Ivo. Well, that's all she wrote. Ivo clocks him with one punch, dude's laid out on the ground. And the guy starts crying because Ivo broke his nose. I was like, hey, those muscles ain't helping you out, man. You can't fight. We took the beer from him, poured it on his head, and told him to get the fuck out of the parking lot. It was funny as hell, one punch.
Now I'm freaking out because I'm showing up to play our first show at City Gardens with somebody who's banned for life. I'm like, how am I going to tell Randy that Ivo's my bass player? He's going to freak. I get there and pull Randy aside and I said, "Randy, I got to talk to you. I have a little problem. The guy that plays bass isn't really welcomed here." Randy was screaming in my face like he was my dad and I had just smashed the family china for no reason. He was spitting, screaming, cursing, pointing. I mean, literally, he was like, "You fucking asshole, you're fucked. Fuck you. I don't have an opening band. You can't play here. There's no way you're playing here. Absolutely not," screaming at the top of his lungs.
They did keep it a secret from me until the very last minute, and Dave is right. I did lose my fucking mind when I found out. I had to act that way to show that I was serious because it was my job. I've had to be good and not start any trouble to play that. Ivo had to be good and not start any trouble to play that show.
The guys in the Uprise and the Pagan Babies come right over and they're like, "What's the matter?" And Randy threw his hands up and walked away disgusted. I told them they were not going to let us play. And they said, "Well, if Vision's not going to play, then the Uprise aren't playing." And the Pagan Babies guys were like, "Dude, if you guys aren't playing, we're not playing." My head was in my hands. I was like, fuck, what am I going to do? And the next thing you know, Waddy and his manager come walking over. I could barely understand what he said, but he said something like, "What seems to be the problem?"
You do accents.
Whatever.
Committed.
I told him what happened, and Waddy goes, "Did you come from far away?" And I go, "Not as far as you." And Waddy asked, "Well, how far?" I said, "About 40 minutes down the road." And he says, "That's far enough. What's the name of the band?" I told him it was Vision. And he goes, "If Vision doesn't play, the Exploited don't play." I was stunned. Randy threw his hands up and was like, "Okay, fine, you guys play." And then Ivo walks off the stage and right out of the club, "The second you're done," I told him, "No problem, whatever you want." So that's exactly what we did. We played our set, Ivo immediately left, and he was totally cool about it.
As far as Waddy saying he wouldn't play, I don't think that's true, because I was his booking agent in New York back then. He wouldn't have pulled that on me. They were nice guys. I remember their manager at the time used to let Waddy babysit his kids. Waddy was a great guy. Of course, once they got on stage, it was a different story.
Bruce Boyd, Pagan Babies drummer. We knew there was trouble coming because the Exploited had that song, "Fuck the USA." The Skinheads back then, and I knew from all the punk shows I had seen from '83 on, were always very pro-American. But they had all the American flag patches sewn on their green flight jackets. Knew that they were not going to be very nice to the Exploited.
It's weird, this whole American thing. When we opened the club, if I put "From England" on a Bauhaus flyer, that made people come out to the show. But when I put the same thing on an Exploited flyer, people didn't come because of the whole American thing. They all loved the Clash song, "I'm So Bored with the USA." What's the difference? It doesn't make any sense.
The Uprise played right before The Exploited. The Exploited had set up their gear and left it on stage like, you're just gonna have to work around this. I think that added more fuel to the fire.
We were loading in that night, and there were some dudes from the Uprise crew hanging out. Everybody was excited about the show, but in the back of my mind I'm thinking, there's gonna be fucking trouble.
Oh, right. The Uprise were great. Scott and Matt were full-blown skins. They knew there were going to be a lot of skinheads, so they came out wearing wigs. I saw Scott up on stage with this huge blonde afro, and I was like, what the hell is this guy doing? And all they were doing was just making fun of everybody.
The Uprise set up a big American flag on the stage, and that didn't help either. I think the Uprise guys put on big afro wigs too. They were being real sarcastic and saying things like, oh, don't worry about the people from this country, we're fine. You guys can come over here and set your shit up, we'll work around it, it's fine.
We had no trouble from the crowd. Vision had no trouble from the crowd. Everybody was moshing it up and loving it. Then I thought, this is kind of weird to have The Exploited come out and headline this show. This was just not the scene for the first three bands, and then The Exploited.
Then The Exploited came on. I just assumed that the skinheads would sort of like The Exploited. I mean, the skinheads wanted to be from England, the Exploited were from England, and they both had that same meathead mentality.
The crowd seemed like they hated the band. They were spitting on Waddy.
As The Exploited played, you could hear all these gobs from spit raining down on the Waddy. You could literally see the gobs of spit being launched at him. You could see the skins in the crowd hawking loogies, just firing away, and then landed everywhere. But The Exploited just kept on going.
The only reason we went after Waddy and Exploited that night was because they got the skins all riled up. We had the American flags going, we were having a great time. And the kick in the ass was, we were all Americaned up that night. The Exploited were like, fuck the USA, fuck the USA. So it kind of pissed everybody off.
The skins all moved up to the front. They started by chanting, USA, USA. Then they all gave the finger. Then they started spitting on Waddy, but he never backed down or said anything. He just stood his ground. You could feel it in the air. Once all those skinheads began pushing their way up front, you just knew that something was going to happen and that the Exploited were going to have a rough time of it. I was like, damn, I don't know if I ever want to be a frontman. I don't know if I'd ever be a frontman who could pull that off.
Spitting started back in England. It was a way of showing appreciation. It didn't mean the same thing that it did over there as over here. The Exploited were used to it, so it didn't really bother them.
And Waddy screaming, the skins on me mates! The skins on me mates! And we're like, fuck you! We're spitting on them and shit. It was just us being us, that's all. When the shit went down, he probably thought it was all the skins against him, but it wasn't. He pissed us off because we were all Americaned up that night. And the other night, it probably wouldn't have mattered. We were doing chicken rides, we had the American flags flying. It was a great night.
I decided that was time to go and meet some chicks or whatever. I mean, that's the reason I'm in a band in the first place. Get chicks.
And that was it. After that, it was chaos. I was outside interviewing the Pagan Babies in their van for Jersey Beat, and it was like conducting an interview in Kuwait. There was noise everywhere, shit flying through the air. We saw through the window that people were throwing bottles. It was utter chaos.
It only takes 10 guys working an empty U-Haul trailer for a couple of minutes to tip it over. It was empty because all of the equipment was on stage. It was just a trailer, not the whole van.
They tipped their van over and chased them right out of Trenton. It was insane.
They only tipped over the U-Haul trailer. It would have been national news if they tipped over a whole van. That simply did not happen. Those kids are full of shit. And I don't remember any windows being smashed. Maybe one or two got broken, that's it. The band really didn't care. It was a good paying gig for them. And all those kids who came to the show and didn't like them and spit on them, they all bought t-shirts. The Exploited sold a shitload of merchandise. They would sell $2,000 to $3,000 worth of stuff a night. And the van, it couldn't have been anything that bad because they were able to drive it to the next gig. Maybe they had some duct tape over the windows. Maybe they called U-Haul and got a new van and trailer the next day, but they drove away in the van.
I got out of there before they kicked over the U-Haul and spray painted all the racist graffiti on it. I wondered if they had to go to a U-Haul place and get another trailer, or if they had to drive around with all kinds of white power graffiti painted on the side of the one that got trashed.
A couple of nights later, one of the guys from the Uprise got stabbed in the parking lot. Some Philly guy stuck him right underneath the armpit as payback for some other shit that went down that night. So me and Sam Psycho found the guy and we beat the hell out of him. We tried to break his leg. We dragged him over to the curb, we jumped up and down on him, trying to get his leg to break. It wouldn't break! He's all wobbly and stretchy, and we couldn't get it to break. So we just wound up pissing on him. That was the night Adams, this fat, pudgy guy who always had a mohawk, stopped coming around because we were too violent. See, when you're drunk all the time, it all kind of meshes together. There are a lot of great nights there, all those crazy fights stand out. I miss those days. Now that I'm married with kids, I don't do shit anymore.
Mike
Take us home. Take us home.
Yeah. Once I got into my own band and started going out on tour and playing those small little towns where people aren't so tolerant of you, especially if they think you come up with this new big New York attitude and the local tough guy wants to show up the singer of the New York band or whatever. Every time I had to go play in front of a hostile crowd, I would always think of that show. I would always think of Waddy standing up to the whole crowd of people who were very vocal that they didn't like him. Just the balls that they had to stand out there and play through that. That's the performance I think of. It was impressive.
And scene. Yeah.